All right, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into a case that's as chilling as it is puzzling.
It's the Dupont de Ligonnès case.
Yep, the one that seems like it's straight out of a true crime thriller. A seemingly normal family living in Nantes, France, just vanishes into thin air back in 2011.
And they leave behind more questions than answers, that's for sure.
So are you ready to unpack all this with me?
Absolutely. Let's see if we can make sense of this whole thing together.
Great. Just a heads up, all we've got is this Wikipedia article to work with. But hey, sometimes that's all you need to spark a good deep dive, right?
Totally. So what's the first thing that jumps out at you when you look at this case?
Honestly, it's the sheer mystery surrounding it. A whole family disappears, and the father becomes the prime suspect in their murders. It's almost too much to wrap your head around.
It definitely grabs your attention from the get-go. But before we jump into all the theories and speculation, maybe we should start with the basics. Who were the Dupont de Ligonnès? What was their life like before all this happened?
Right, let's set the scene a bit.
Okay, so we have Xavier, the father, and Agnes, the mother. They had 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit. They lived this seemingly ordinary life in Nantes, blending in with their community, but there's a twist.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. They weren't just your average family, were they?
Not quite. They came from a pretty prominent aristocratic background. It adds a whole other layer to this whole story.
It makes you wonder, right? They had this lineage, this history,
Yeah.
and yet they ended up in this horrific situation.
It's one of the many things that makes this case so compelling.
So let's fast forward to April 21st, 2011. This is where things take a truly dark turn.
That's the day the bodies of Agnes and all 4 children are discovered.
And this is where that chilling detail comes in, right?
Yeah.
They weren't just found dead, they were found.
Buried under the patio of their home. It doesn't get much more eerie than that.
Ugh, it's hard to even imagine. And to add to the horror, they also found.
The family's 2 Labrador dogs, also dead, also buried with the family.
It's just heartbreaking. And adds this whole other layer of disturbing, I mean, what kind of person could do something like that, right?
It's the question everyone was asking, and suspicion, naturally, fell on Xavier, the missing father.
I mean, it seems logical. But is there any actual hard evidence pointing to him? Or is it just because he vanished?
Well, let's take a look at the timeline leading up to the disappearance. There are some pretty unsettling details that emerge when you start digging into it.
Lay it on me. I'm all ears.
Okay, so a few weeks before everyone disappears, Xavier starts making some pretty strange purchases. We're talking cement, a shovel, a hoe, lime, even rifle bullets. Not exactly your average grocery list.
Yeah, that definitely raises some red flags, right?
Mm.
Who needs all of that unless they're planning something sinister?
Exactly. And then there's the fact that he also started practicing at a shooting range around the same time. It's like he's preparing for something.
This is all sounding very suspicious. Anything else?
Oh, there's more. He went on this weird road trip hundreds of miles away from Nantes to a DIY store. And what does he buy? Large bin liners and adhesive plastic paving slabs.
It's like he's trying to cover his tracks, right?
Yeah.
Going out of his way to make these purchases.
It's hard to interpret it any other way.
And what about the dogs? Weren't there some reports about them acting strangely before everything went quiet?
Yes. Neighbors reported hearing the Labradors howling nonstop for 2 nights straight in early April. Then, silence.
That's just chilling. It sounds like something terrible happened during those 2 nights.
And here's where Xavier's communication starts getting really strange. He contacted Agnes's employer claiming she was sick and then made up a story about her moving to the U.S. He even went as far as writing a resignation letter on her behalf.
Whoa, he's really going all out to create this elaborate cover story.
Right. And all this while closing bank accounts, settling school payments, even terminating the lease on their house. Every action points to a meticulously planned disappearance.
It's like he's erasing their entire existence, methodically wiping away any trace of them.
And to top it off, there was this cryptic message left on their mailbox. Return all mail to sender. Thank you. Almost like a final farewell.
So we have all this strange behavior, these unsettling purchases, and then he just disappears.
Pretty much. The last known sighting of him is from security footage at a Formula One hotel in Roquebrune-sur-Argent on April 14th.
He just abandoned his car there and vanished.
Yep, leaving behind one final piece of this twisted puzzle. A series of letters.
Oh, right. I remember reading about those. In one, he claimed he was working for the DEA and that the family had to enter witness protection.
A claim that investigators found highly unlikely, especially since there was no evidence to support any connection to the DEA.
Yeah, sounds pretty far-fetched. Like something out of a movie.
It does, and yet it's another detail that keeps this case from being a simple open and shut.
Okay, so we have a missing father, 5 murdered family members, and a web of suspicious actions and misleading statements. But I'm guessing it's not that straightforward, is it?
You're catching on. While the official investigation points to Xavier as the prime suspect, his family maintains his innocence.
Really? What's their argument? What makes them believe he couldn't have done it?
They raise some pretty interesting points about the logistics of the burials, the lack of forensic evidence tying Xavier to the crime scene, even the accuracy of the official timeline.
This just keeps getting more and more intriguing. Let's dive into those details. So let's hear the family side of this story. What makes them so convinced that Xavier is innocent?
Well, one of their main points is about the burials themselves. They argue that there's just no way Xavier could have buried 5 bodies under that patio all by himself.
I can see why they'd say that. It sounds like a pretty massive undertaking.
It is. We're talking over 2.5 cubic meters of earth that had to be moved, and all without anyone noticing. And on top of that, you gotta remember Xavier had a history of neck and back problems.
Oh, right. I vaguely remember reading about that.
Yeah, so it seems unlikely he could have handled such strenuous work, right?
So are they implying someone else was involved?
They definitely raise that possibility. They say even if Xavier was somehow involved, he couldn't have pulled it off alone.
Makes sense. What about forensic evidence at the burial site? Did they find anything linking Xavier to it?
And that's another thing. The family claims there was absolutely no forensic evidence found. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing directly connecting Xavier to the graves.
You'd think if he was digging those graves and handling the bodies, they'd find something.
Exactly. That's what makes the absence of forensic evidence at the burial site so strange. It just adds another layer of mystery to this whole thing.
Okay, so we've got the physical challenges of the burials, the lack of forensic evidence. What about that timeline? You mentioned that the family disputes the official version of events.
Oh, right. There were multiple neighbors who reported seeing Agnes alive days after the date investigators believe she was murdered.
Wait, seriously? There are witnesses who place her alive after she was supposedly already dead.
Yep, it's pretty wild. One neighbor even claims they chatted with Agnes while walking her dog, and another witness, a friend of Agnes, says she saw her at a shop on either the 7th or 8th of April.
That's a huge discrepancy. If those sightings are accurate, it throws the entire timeline into question.
It completely changes the game, because if Agnes was alive after April 4th, it means the murders could have happened much later, and that totally changes the whole sequence of events.
And it also means Xavier might not have even been in Tash when the murders happened.
Exactly. The whole thing just casts doubt on the idea that Xavier acted alone, or even that he was the one who did it at all.
Wow, okay. So we have conflicting timelines, doubts about the burials, and no solid forensic evidence. It sounds like the case against Xavier is way weaker than it seemed at first.
It's definitely way more complex than a simple open and shut case. There are just too many unanswered questions and inconsistencies.
It's like we're dealing with 2 separate puzzles, right? The mystery of the murders and then the mystery of Xavier's disappearance.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's possible those 2 puzzles are connected, but in ways we don't understand yet.
So how do we even begin to reconcile these conflicting narratives?
Yeah.
We have all this evidence that seems to incriminate Xavier, but then there are also these doubts raised by his family and the lack of hard proof.
It's a classic he said, she said, but with unbelievably high stakes. We need to be very careful about jumping to conclusions and really consider all the evidence, even if it creates more questions than answers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe we should try to take a step back. Just look at the undisputed facts, What do we know for sure happened?
Okay, so 5 people are dead. Their bodies were found buried under the patio of their home, and Xavier, the father, disappeared right around the same time and hasn't been seen since.
And those are the only things we can say with absolute certainty.
Yeah.
Everything else is interpretation and speculation, limited by the information we have.
Precisely.
All right, so those are our basic facts. But now I want to talk about that big elephant in the room. That letter Xavier sent to his family claiming he was a DEA agent forced into witness protection.
Right, that letter. It's definitely the most baffling piece of this puzzle. If it were true, it would totally change everything.
It does feel a little convenient, right?
Yeah.
Like a desperate attempt to explain his actions.
Yeah, I get that. However, there's no proof that it's true, but there's no proof it's false either. It's just out there hanging over everything.
So we kind of have to entertain the possibility, however unlikely, that there might be some truth to it.
Right. In a case this complicated and mysterious, we have to keep our minds open to anything. no matter how strange it seems.
Okay, so where does that leave us?
Yeah,
Did Xavier actually commit these murders and flee? Or is there something else going on that we haven't even considered?
we're back to square one. This isn't a case with easy answers. The Dupont de Ligonnès family just vanished. They left behind a void filled with questions and theories.
So let's recap. We have a seemingly normal family, sudden disappearance, the mother and children found dead, the father missing, and this bizarre claim about the DEA.
We have evidence that seems to point to Xavier, but we also have gaps in the story and things that don't quite add up. It's like a puzzle with missing pieces.
And even after all these years, the mystery remains unsolved. It's incredibly frustrating.
I know, right? But that's part of what makes this case so captivating. It's a reminder that sometimes, even with all our technology and forensic science, some mysteries just might never be fully solved.
It's one of those cases that really sticks with you.
Yeah.
No wonder there's so much speculation, all these amateur detectives trying to crack it online.
Oh, yeah, the internet loves a good mystery, and this one's like a breeding ground for theories.
Right.
I've even seen some people digging into Xavier's online activity, trying to find connections to extremist groups or like fringe religious movements.
Now that you mention it, I think I remember reading about his involvement in some intense online Catholic forums.
Yeah, he was pretty active in theological discussions, apparently. Even got himself banned from at least one forum for expressing some, well, let's just say controversial views.
Do we know anything about what those views were?
From what I've read, he was really into the whole concept of sacrifice, and some of the stuff he was saying about it was uh, a little unsettling, to put it mildly.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty creepy. Do you think that could be a clue to his motive? Like maybe he saw the murders as some sort of twisted sacrifice.
Well, it's impossible to say for sure, and we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions based on speculation, but it's definitely a detail that adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing.
For sure. But it's important to remember that there's no direct evidence linking his online activity to the murders.
Absolutely, it's purely speculative, but it's another example of what makes this case so fascinating to try and unpack.
Okay, so we have the family's perspective, all the theories swirling around online, and the official investigation. And they all seem to be leading to different conclusions. Where do we land after diving deep into all of this? What does it all mean?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is that truth can be pretty slippery, especially in a case as complex as this. We have circumstantial evidence that seems to incriminate Xavier, sure, but we also have these legitimate questions and alternate perspectives that we can't just dismiss.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing. We can see the general outline, but so many of the details are just gone.
Exactly. And honestly, that's one of the most unsettling things about this case, the lack of closure, the questions that may never be answered, the possibility that we might never know for sure what happened to this family.
It's tough, right? It's human nature to crave a resolution. We want to know why. But sometimes the journey of exploring the unknown is just as important as finding a concrete answer.
I totally agree. And this deep dive has certainly taken us down some unexpected paths. We've looked at the details of the murders, the timeline, all the different theories, and this mystery surrounding Xavier's disappearance.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. But it hasn't just been about the facts and the evidence. It's also been about the human impact. The grief of a family, the dedication of the investigators, and all the people trying to piece together what happened.
And while those answers might always remain out of reach, I think this deep dive has given everyone listening a framework for understanding this case, the information and the different perspectives to form your own opinions, even if those opinions are still up for debate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who's totally hooked now, what would you recommend they do if they want to explore this case even further?
Well, the internet's your friend. There are tons of articles, documentaries, and even online forums dedicated to every tiny detail of this case.
Yeah, I have a feeling a lot of our listeners are going to take you up on that. This deep dive has shown us that sometimes the most baffling mysteries can be the most rewarding to explore, especially when we approach them with curiosity and open minds, ready to embrace the unknown.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Sometimes the most compelling mysteries aren't the ones that get solved, but the ones that make us question everything we thought we knew and force us to look deeper into the complexities of human nature and this idea of truth being more than just black and white.
Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.